Portfolio Composer, episode 179.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I'm so excited that you're here joining us again for this episode. And this is a little bit different episode. A few weeks ago, I was chatting with Anthony Lanman, and I just had this idea, spur of the moment, to have him guest host the show. Anthony is a fine composer. He's also the host of the One Track podcast, which everyone should listen to. And he was featured on the podcast in episode 105, so you can go back and find that. And he semi-willingly agreed to do this. I hope you enjoyed this interview a great deal with the incredible Jordan Smith.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Portfolio Composer. I am not Garrett Hope. I am your hopefully adequate guest host, Anthony Joseph Lanman. I am guest hosting today on the request of Garrett Hope because he thought it would be fun. That's his word, not nerve-wracking because, it's not my podcast. So hopefully I will fill his shoes in the right way. And I'm very excited, though, that I am able to interview someone who we talked in the past about possibly doing my podcast, One Track, but thought, it might not be really the right venue. And then this came up, and I'm really excited to be able to interview Jordan Randall Smith. And I'm just going to say hi right now. How are you doing?
Hi, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad we could work this out.
Me too.
Yeah. And Jordan is the music director of the chamber orchestra Symphony Number One, and he's also music director of the Govans Chorale. Am I saying that right?
Govans, yeah.
Govans.
Yeah, either one will do.
And, I think you can have, and really we'll get into it, several aspects of your career and what you've been doing with Symphony Number One. But I think composers especially can get a lot out of this interview. And I want to just start at the beginning of your story, if you can, if you'll indulge us and just say, just tell us, why conducting? What got you into conducting?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Well, if you really want to go all the way back, my father is my parents both are musicians. My father was a choir director. He kind of had the trifecta. He was a school choir director. He did the church choir, and he sang in the civic chorus in the suburb of Dallas where I grew up. And my mother was a pianist. In fact, she accompanied my dad's groups many times. And so I was kind of around it, although I kind of had to come to music on my own terms. That happened. I was kind of a late bloomer in that regard. Really got that online in high school, but really the conducting bug did bite because I figured out in high school that I was very into high school marching band. I was a percussionist. I was into drumline. I was into all of these things, and I was inspired by my high school band director, as so many women percussion students tend to be that go on to study music themselves. And so I wanted to do that. And so that would be the kind of initial conducting bug. And it wasn't until college that I kind of came to understood, okay, I really want to pursue something more along the lines of a professional or collegiate sort of track position rather than a public school as sort of my primary direction.
Yeah, and when you say you came out late, and I guess, for many, if you're talking about a lot of classical musicians, high school is late. Was there like one moment where you knew, like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to spend my life doing? Was there sort of that one moment that hit, or was it just kind of a gradual thing?
In my case, there truly was a one moment. I mean, I guess it was also gradual, and at some point, that one moment was the distillation of that gradual process to some degree. But there really was a radical moment for me. My freshman year of high school, joining the drumline. I didn't even start percussion which was my primary instrument, until high school. I was a bassoonist for a year, and I primarily chose bassoon because they said the percussion class was too full in middle school, and I could join drumline when I got to high school. So that was really my bassoon's a great instrument, but I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do, and so I do remember very clearly, though, going through drumline camp. We had kind of an early summer rehearsal schedule, and that was a lot of fun. But I'll never forget when we started learning the opening drill and putting the music with the drill. Our show was Star Wars that year. That was when the special editions were coming to theaters and all of that. And so that, you'd be hard pressed to find a more accessible, and really riveting orchestral score for a 14-year-old to kind of get caught up in. And we happened to have a very good program. There were 300 kids in the band, and so this huge sound was emanating, and it really just started with the opening kind of ethereal music from the New Hope sort of soundtrack, and it kind of went from there. And I knew that in the first couple of sets that we rehearsed, I just knew right then and there I had to do something to do with music, and then it kind of went from there.
And let me just ask you, since then, have you had the chance to conduct that music?
That's a good question. Honestly, I have not yet managed to work Star Wars. I should really work on that. I guess I'm not really a real conductor until I've got to do some Star Wars.
So, yeah, well, I thought might bring that magical feeling back for you. I don't know.
I think it would.
Yeah. So, you decided to go down this conducting path. I think you said, in college for sure. And, maybe you could talk a little bit about the career trajectory for a conductor. And, because it seems like it might be somewhat similar to a composer, but, like from the moment you're in college and you're a student and you have to figure out, okay, this is what I want to do. And how do I do this? How do I make this my life? How did you go about doing that?
That's a great question. And I have to agree with you. I think there are some similarities. And I think one of the things that's most similar is that more so than any other, it's probably true of all musicians, but it's probably more true of both composers and conductors, that the exact path is just not all that clear.
Yeah.
When you talk to your teachers as an undergraduate, let's say, you say, I want to be a composer, I want to be a conductor. And they'll have a great story to tell you about their life, and you'll hear all these kind of improbable things. Sure. And I have my own very improbable, weird things that eventually crop up. If you just keep at it long enough, weird things will happen and things will work out sometimes.
Yeah.
But kind of dumb luck stuff that, if you were to tell somebody else, they'll go, well, that particular thing will never happen to me, so how am I going to find my own version of that? Right. And so I think that's the trickiest part. And so I think is, understanding that really at bottom there just has to be just a bulldog-like tenacity. You have to find that. If you don't find anything else early on, it's got to be some tenacity to pick yourself up and keep going and Absolutely. Go at it again.
Yeah.
And apply again and call them again, email them again, and start another group again. Just again. Keyword again.
Right. Right. So you mentioned starting a group, and hey, you've started this orchestra, this chamber orchestra, Symphony Number One. And in this day and age, what possessed you to do that? Like what well, because I'm thinking like, okay, you're sitting there like, what am I going to do? And you're like, okay, I'm going to start a symphony. So how did you arrive at that decision? Given all the problems and everything, that we hear about, all the time, whatever the orchestras are having. But yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I wish I could say it was a really high-minded moment for me, and some kind of just brilliant idea flashed like a vision in front of me, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't. I think, I'll tell you by way of a difficult chapter in recent time, which was that I was accepted to the Peabody Conservatory, and I did my 2 years of full-time study en route to my doctorate, including serving as a TA in the opera department and studying with my teacher Gustav Meyer, and some different opportunities that sort of arose out of those things. But that brings me up to the spring of 2014, which was great for me both professionally and personally as well. And I was in a relationship, and I was getting to conduct all the time, and it was great. And then all of a sudden, the relationship ended and the semester ended, and it was like a brick wall. I wasn't prepared quite for having to go from doing that much to that little musically. And I realized that summer, because some people are able to, while they're in school, do a great job of applying for things and having something to land immediately on their feet on the other side of their coursework. I've never been one of those people. I really put myself in it all the way. Not that others don't, but I struggled to also have the bandwidth left over to get all the applications in and really get that next thing lined up immediately out of the door. So I ended up in the spring of 2014 really not with a whole lot of specific musical opportunities ready to go. So I quickly realized, no one's going to do it for me. I've got to get something started, and I've got to do it fast. I'm going to go nuts if I don't. And so I started a group in Dallas when I was living there. I co-founded with my friend and colleague Ryan Ross a group called it was a music festival called the Dallas Festival of Modern Music, and we put on it was kind of a combination performer presenter format. So we produce our own concerts as well as bring in others to do some concerts each fall. We did that for 3 years, and so I had some experience starting a nonprofit already. So it was kind of like, okay, well, I'll just do it again, and this time I'll just build a better anthill. I'll take everything I learned from the first go round and apply it there. But I just knew I needed to get something out the door. And so that's, to tie back into the earlier point, I think if nothing else, just keep at it. That, just keep at it, and things will kind of, some opportunities will come out of that. And that's what's happened. And so, so that was the initial thing, is I've got to start some kind of group to fuel myself artistically, and also to keep myself on the trajectory that I want to see myself on. And then it turned out that the folks that I started working with had a lot of great ideas. And of course, I had been involved with new music as a percussionist to begin with. So that was natural to me to want to continue to work in that space. And so we came up with a concert format. We came up with a name. And but then, of course, if your goal is, what we focus on, kind of our motto is substantial works by emerging composers. Mm-hmm. And if you want a substantial work, which we take to mean an extended length work, not a short, kind of overture or miniature, but something, at least kind of at the 20-minute mark or longer would be the goal. If that's our if that's our signature offering, well, that's a lot of lead time before you can even get out of the gate. So even though early in the fall of 2014, I had this concept and I was working with my colleagues on getting this out the door, then you got to commission a composer and get them to start writing you a long piece.
Right.
That takes a while. So I'll never forget coming to Mark Fromm, who was our first composer, and saying, hey, can you write me a symphony that's at least 20 minutes long in 4 months or less? And he said, sure, why the hell not?
Yeah,
and so he managed to get it done, and it was actually one of the strongest compositions. We've had a lot of strong compositions, and his was definitely one of the stronger ones. And we were often running after that.
Wow. And from you before I go where I was just going to go, you mentioned that the Dallas Festival and then ultimately Symphony Number One sort of came out of a difficult period, right? Where you had to pick yourself up and kind of make your own opportunity. And, sometimes, and I don't know if you view, I don't know if you view that period or anything like that as a failure. I'm not saying that. But my question is, sometimes we can maybe learn more from a failure than a success,
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there some, can you give us like an example or a story of maybe where you learned a lot from a failure?
Well, just to tee it up, I'll say I completely agree. And I think that word, I always call it the F word or the other F word or the real F word. There's one truly taboo word. And I don't know if this is international. I think it's definitely true in America. I don't know if it's true everywhere, but I think we have kind of a hang up about that word. And especially, in an industry when it comes to being a composer or being a conductor, where there is some self-marketing involved, any kind of small business, which essentially is what you are as a composer in a way, is, you are Your Name Inc., is your business. Mm-hmm. And you've got to go out there. And so when you have those, you have to project success, and you want to project that you're doing well and showing that you're doing all these things.
Right.
But it gives people on the outside a false sense of just the difficulty involved. So I really applaud you for saying the word unabashedly and just getting it out there and talking about it. So yeah, as far as failures, I think it was a failure of mine that I didn't manage to, for instance, it's hard to keep your website up, and that's a tip I'll give to composers always, is just keep that website ready to give the address at a moment's notice so that people can get, it doesn't have to be a great website, it just has to be an accurate website, so just keep putting things up and just keep it up, and don't let it get sold off to some kind of medical device company. I've got a story for that, actually.
Oh, okay.
But keep your domain and keep your website up. But so as far as failure is concerned, I didn't do a great job of all of that, I think, while I was still in school. And it cost me, because I really should have had some better continuity, because I had developed a pretty good resume at that point, and I had developed some credentials and some good referrals and all of those things, all the things that you need. But then I just didn't do a great job of putting my hat in the ring, And so, but again, if you can, even if you have those mistakes, if you can figure out how to pick yourself back up and go out again, I think that's everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That can't be understated, and especially in our fields, whether conducting or composing or whatever. Yeah, just if you're able to just keep going, that's going to be huge for your career. Just that by itself. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thought as we're just thinking about failure. This isn't quite a failure, but it is a thing where I kind of, as I reflect backwards, if there was one thing that I wish I had done a little differently the first go round, it's that I wish I had set a little bit more ambitious. I wish we had, as a team, had set a little bit more ambitious goals for ourselves when it comes to fundraising, because fundraising leads directly back to how many commissions can you do, how many performers can you hire, how many performances can you organize. And I think if we had done a little more, if we just set our sights a little higher. Now, there's a warning out there too. There's a balance that has to be struck. I'm sure you probably saw, was it last summer in the Boston Globe, as far as that ill-fated new music festival.
Oh yes, yeah.
Boy. So there is a danger in being too aggressive too soon, but certainly I think we had conservative goals and we had conservative results that time around. And,
right.
Maybe we could have done a little more if we'd pushed a little harder, or just expected a little more of ourselves at that point. I think don't let yourself think that you're too young to be able to pull off something big. Sometimes it's helpful just to not know that you're not supposed to be able to do something, and that's how you're going to do it. I think sometimes it's just not realizing that it's supposed to be difficult.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you bring up, because I think many of us, maybe are conservative, maybe tend to be afraid to think too big. And you brought up that new music festival in Boston last summer. And there's a distinct difference there. They thought really big, but then, they sort of told everybody publicly that, all this was going to happen and before it, really happened. But, if it's okay to think big, and try to go for those things, and it's okay if they don't happen, I recently learned that lesson all over again. I'm working, I can't say too much about it right now, but I'm working in a duo with another composer right now. And he's really shown me that he's not afraid to think big. And I have in the past been, I think it's something a lot of people deal with, like, oh, that's too big, or I'll never get that, or that mentality, and
absolutely.
We've gone after some things that I've been like, well, that's a great thought, but and we've actually gotten a few things, and it just taught me that, you shouldn't be afraid to think big, and shouldn't be afraid to fail as well. That's another huge thing, I think, again, in our society in particular. We have a fear of failure, and it can hold us back, so.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that. I think that the classical music world is a very small world, and there's, you need to be nice, and you need to not get a reputation for not being nice. And you need to be professional, and, and all that entails. But dream big artistically, everything else needs to be in order, but in terms of your artistic goals and your ideas, go for it, and don't be afraid of, it's small, but it's not so small that any one point of failure is going to wreck you. I mean, there are other, if you have a few musicians that didn't like your piece, let's say, guess what? There's another flutist that'll do it the next time,
right?
Kind of a thing.
Right.
So really don't. That can't be the guiding force. Is artistically speaking, that's not the place to be to shortchange yourself, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit here, because I'm trying my best to think like Garrett and and do his podcast. And there's a lot in his podcast about his podcast. Of course, the Portfolio Composer is really focused on the business, of being a musician, a composer, and marketing, and the business side. And I know, you can speak to this, but I know when I went to school, I was not trained for any of that. And when I got out, I was very ill prepared. I had zero business skills, zero marketing skills. And, I've always really traditionally been a very introverted person. And so that's not a good formula for success in our world. So, I've had a lot of learning to do over the years, and I'm sure you did too. So can you share with us a little bit maybe of, some things you've learned over the years as far as, marketing wise, how some things you've learned, with Symphony Number One, and how you've been successfully marketing yourselves.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's hard, and it's always changing. So this segment of the podcast, I'm sure, won't age as well as maybe some of the other parts, just because we'll name a platform or something, and it'll go out of business next year, and it'll just be gone, and so it'll be moot, kind of a thing. But I'll say a few things. First is email doesn't seem to be going away. I read I remember very clearly reading a story, and I think it was Fortune, or it might have been Forbes, back in 2008, 9, somewhere in there, a long time ago. It said, "Email is dead." That was the article title. And the thing is, email is a kind of a tired, really, really antiquated technology. It just hasn't kept up with the things that you'd want in a communications platform, and just taking, say, iMessage or Facebook Messenger as other examples of messaging platforms that exist now. Obviously we want to be able to send GIFs and send reactions and send text and send stickers and all kinds of multimodal kind of communications. And so we have this very different old school thing. But the fact is, it hasn't gone away, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And unlike, snail mail hasn't gone away either, but it has been limited, significantly by how we choose to use it.
Sure.
Email, I think. So I just very clearly remember trying to push away and get away from caring about email lists or worrying about that stuff. But that is totally false. And even this year, it's become more true than ever that you have to own your contacts. You've got to get a hold of the contact information for your people. Your audience members, your donors, your supporters of any kind. It can't just be your likes on Facebook. That won't do it. Even at the beginning of this year, they've announced a bunch of new changes, and now you're only getting something like 2 or 3% at best of your audience is going to see a post that you put up for free on a Facebook page. So you're either going to pay to play, which you already had to spend all the time to gather your followers, and now you're going to have to pay to actually reach them. So it's kind of a racket. And then on the email side, you have their email address. So figuring out how to do that well is, I think, number one. But one of the things that people don't realize is that MailChimp, as just one example, it's kind of scary. So pulling back the curtain a little bit, you can see a significant amount of information about specifically who, not just, I had 400 reactions of anonymous people. Right. No, I know that Sally and Bob and Mackenzie from back home all opened this email within the first 3 minutes. And I know that, that Jan and, Richard both, they clicked through to the link that I wanted them to open, and somebody else went and tracked me down on Twitter or something. And somebody else I lost because they clicked on some link and the link was broken. Oops, I didn't do the email right or something. So you can get a significant trove of data. And by the way, you can even go so far as to say somebody actually clicks on the correct link that you want them to click on, like buy the shirt or buy the new album or something. And then you don't see any sales come through. Well, you can go retarget those same people. In fact, you can do a retargeting across modalities now where you can get that same list of people, say that 20 people open up the buy the album link from your email. Mm-hmm. You know exactly which 20 people, and then you can re-email that group of people so that everybody else doesn't get spammed. The people for whom it seems to be relevant, you can say, hey, we noticed you can even do an empty cart one. You can get really sophisticated and do an empty, so they open up their or a incomplete shopping cart. So they go in there, they start to order, they don't finish. It gets that granular. And not only can you get an email sent out, you can also get a Google advertisement set up to just go to that person. And you can get a Facebook advertisement to just go to that list of email people so that they see it, and you only have to spend money on showing it to them and no one else. So those are the kind of sophisticated ways that then Facebook becomes useful, so you don't have to spend $1 jillion to try to blast 20,000 people where only a dozen or two folks actually it's going to be relevant for them, or they're going to be prepared to actually make the purchase.
Right.
So there's a little primer on marketing as I see it these days.
Yeah. And is that where you guys' primary focus is like marketing online and through social media and member mail lists and those things?
Yeah. Well, I think for us, we recognized pretty early on that as a service to the composer, we would record every concert. We would perform every concert twice, minimum, and then we would cut those together into along with the dress rehearsals. We record the dress rehearsal, and we record both performances, and we do kind of a mini patch session. An hour before the concert, we'll do a patch for about 30 minutes and hit spots that we think, for instance, say a last movement or something that you suspect the musicians will be tired by the end of the concert and it won't be their best. So we'll do a run through of the last movement or something so that we have a really good recording when everyone's fresh of that last bit. So anyway, we have all these raw materials that we put together. We cut together a good recording as a service to the composer. Since that's the case, then we realized, well, we should use that, and we should put out commercial releases as often as we feel we have something worth sharing in that kind of a format. And since that's the case, then we realize, well, we're kind of two things. We're a traditional live music performing group like you would expect, but we're also an online recording. We kind of have our little label. We call it Snowtone, which is just Symphony Number One, our initials SNO. So we'll call ourselves Snow for short, and we made our little boutique label for ourselves. We call it Snowtone.
Nice.
And so we put out these recordings, and then we have all this digital content that is this separate sort of layer and separate sort of thing. So then we talk about, as a result of that being a part of our DNA at the core, not as a secondary product, but as a dual primary product. Then we start talking about things like, okay, a concert we recognize this clearly as an authentic experience. You got to go to the concert. There's only one that's going to be quite like tonight. Tomorrow night will be a little different, whether explicitly or just naturally. Okay, so that much is understood. The question then becomes, how can you have authentic digital products so that a recording is not just an ersatz, next best thing, but it's its own best version of itself. So obviously, when you have a premiere recording, that's always an important cornerstone or foundation to the history of that work. So if any other person comes along, so we've had a couple of our commissions go on to the composition has gone on to have its own life, and as a result, then you see the following performances progressively better thanks to the work that we initially did. So you have that. But then we started thinking, what other kinds of digital first products could we do? And so currently what we're experimenting with, we've done a few of these already, and we'll do more this calendar year, is we've got into 360 spherical video. And so we have a small, relatively inexpensive but pretty good spherical camera by Samsung, and it takes a full take of the entire spherical scene, so that you on your device can move around the scene and look at everyone all at once. So we'll put it, for instance, between myself and the first row of performers. And you, so basically you get a surround sound experience. And by the way, that's an experience that you could never recreate in real life, and you certainly couldn't scale it. I could maybe put one person in a chair between myself and musicians, and they could, swivel around in a swivel chair. But besides that, you could never have 100 people be surrounded by an orchestra or a chamber orchestra of, a dozen or 20 people. But now all of a sudden you have this authentic experience that could never be done in real life to scale, but that you can offer out to people. So that's the kinds of things that we're talking about, experimenting with, and trying to push the envelope with. Yeah,
that's really cool. And you said you've done a couple of those already?
Yeah, we did a few kind of smaller things, but our first real example of where we're trying to head is our last big concert of the fall was premiere by a fantastic composer, Carolyn Chen. She wrote a piece called Animalcules, which is a reference to Leeuwenhoek, the early biologist who sort of discovered microorganisms.
Okay.
And that was an early name of it. Anyway, so she's a fantastic, just fascinating compositional approach. I just highly recommend taking a look at her music to anybody listening. But anyway, Carolyn Chen, so we did her piece, Animalcules, and we set the camera up right in the middle, and so we've got a couple of videos up on our YouTube channel. So if anyone wants, and it's also on our website, symphonynumber.one. But yeah, so that's the first time that we really got to. So it's very cool because the music is so it's almost spatial anyway, and there's a lot of different parts going on. So it really helps to be able to get in the middle of the orchestra and actually try to see who's doing what, and because a lot of times you'll get video that's far off and you'll hear kind of clicks and taps and other interesting 21st century sort of sounds, but you're going, well, what's producing that exactly? So in this particular case, it becomes useful to go, oh, look, you're essentially right in their faces, looking at what exactly they're doing to produce the sounds.
Right. Exactly. Oh, that's very, very cool. I can't wait to see one of those. And speaking of working with composers, and I know Symphony Number One has worked with a lot of composers at this point, and like you said earlier, commissioned new work and championed new work and performed it multiple times, recorded it, which is amazing. Every composer out there should be thankful to you and you guys for doing that. And since you're kind of, on the other side of the table, if you will, from the composer, do you have any advice for composers who might be, submitting to a call for scores or submitting their work for consideration or anything like that?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I do see a lot of scores. Every year we have a call for scores, and just with Symphony Number One alone, we've had over 500 entries at this point across the various years. So running across a lot of scores, you kind of start to see trends, and you start to notice what people are doing and what's working and what's not. And it's very, very useful. And by the way, that'd be one piece of advice. If you ever, as a composer, get on a call for scores, in fact, I'll put this out there. If you want to email me, I don't know if there are show notes that we could put it in there, but feel free to get in touch. I'm always looking for new judges for Symphony Number One's call for scores. We do a 2-round process, and we try to do a different panel for each round. So that's one thing I would recommend, because then you can very quickly get a look at a lot of different composers in a format, and it can kind of give you some ideas for what works and what doesn't from the other side. So that's one thing I'll say. But just taking all that and distilling it, I would say my number one piece of advice for composers is try to do everything you can within your power to get access to the best recordings possible of your music. I just can't emphasize that enough. It is absolutely true that good musicians, and certainly any conductor worth their salt, should be able to, at some level, audiate, and some level have the imagination to look at the score and understand broad gestures and look and play at the piano and play a lot of things and piece it together. In a call for scores, however, there's just not the time for a judge. When you all of a sudden you have 40 or more compositions in front of you, or 40 entries, let's say, and 2 compositions each, then you're going, oh boy, I'm going to have to get this down to 3 or 4 minutes each. And that's including, I got to click and download and open the thing and get the thing pulled up and everything. So that's another thing I'll say is make sure your links work 100% perfectly. Try it 17 times, 10 different browsers, open it up, make sure you're logged out so it's not your personal account, so it's configured for public release, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's one thing, the technical stuff, get that right. But separately from that, when you're in that much of a hurry to get a sense, the recording really does become crucial. And it's very tough, because it's really not fair, is it? Because there might be a fantastic composer who just hasn't yet had their music played by, but they might be out in some kind of rural area writing great music, much akin to, say, John Luther Adams, who likes to be out away from folks as much as he can. And that's great, but it's just difficult, because then how do you get your music played? So it's tricky, I know. But either or both of the two things, one being getting the best performers you can with the best recording equipment you can, and 2, MIDI has come a long way, and it's to the point where I'm sure you've had conversations, I certainly have, with other experienced musicians, where occasionally you can get fooled, into thinking you're listening to live musicians occasionally. If it's the right kind of music, the right kind of sound, so I would definitely invest in the best sequencer or the best software or the best patches or what have you to set up a really great MIDI mock-up, and take the time after you finished your score, because of course, just notating your score does not translate into necessarily a good MIDI file. So take the time afterwards to mock all that up correctly, so that the recording that you send in is as accurate as you can make it, just so that the first blush is as positive as you can make it. And it's unfortunate, but I really will say this, and this includes even composers. I say this because I'll have the judges take little notes on what they're listening to, and in one of the final aspects of the selection process, we'll after we've all independently judged, then we'll do some conferring on some notes, especially in cases of ties and things like that, just to look at what people were looking at. And certainly after it's all done, I'll go back and look at the notes. And it's very interesting, even with composers, where my impression is that fully 75%, I wish it weren't so, but fully 75% of the way that composers and other judges, performers too, are looking at this is from a perspective of the performance, even more than it stinks, but even more than the composition itself.
Right.
So that'd be my number one advice: is really focus on that as much as possible.
Okay. Yeah, great advice. And I think we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask you some questions for the lightning round.
Great.
Welcome to the lightning round.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you some lightning round questions, if that's
all right.
If you're brave enough to take these questions.
Brave.
Okay. So the first question is, if it were possible, and you could somehow go back in time, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh, my 20-year-old self. Well, he was about a year from understanding that being a high school band director / drumline instructor was not going to be the long-term path for me. That guy still needed about another year to figure all that out. So I don't. It's tricky because I don't know if I want to really unwind the whole tapestry. But I mean, if I had to point at something, I think I would say I took 5 years to do both the music education and a performance degree, and I think I might have just truncated all of that if I had known a year earlier and just finished in 4 years and moved on to a master's in conducting maybe a year earlier.
Yeah. Okay. What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I became quite enamored of, if there's any, a lot of composer friends I know are big into Lifehacker, and I am a big fan of the website Lifehacker and a lot of the things that they put up. And they talk a lot about the GTD, or Getting Things Done method, which is based out of a book by the same title by David Allen, which I highly recommend for people to read in terms of kind of a simple system to help kind of get you organized and some things like that. But one of the tips in there is, as things come into your bucket of things to do throughout the day, say an email, and then you have to do a thing with the email, write a response, or do an errand or whatever. If it's something that you can get done and processed and over with and archive the email in 2 minutes or less, get it done right then. Stop what you're doing, get it done, get back on task. If it's not, set it aside and process at the appropriate time. But that alone has really helped me in the domain of, I struggled, especially as a early guy coming out of my master's, with email communication oftentimes. And so that's really helped me just kind of stay on track and not get overwhelmed by, just a massive inbox that just seems that you can never get your way out of.
Right. Yeah. Great tip. What instrument have you always wanted to learn to play, and why?
Oh, that's great. Well, that's easy. Cello. I think I've touched on most instruments at some point or another, but cello has, as far as a performing or learning to perform, or even at a basic level, haven't really had to do. And of course, it's it's kind of the king of all instruments, right? Well, I guess that and the organ. Well, so the cello and the organ. How's that? I'll give you two.
Okay, and organ.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, well, organ's cool. What is one composition that had a profound impact on you, and why? So it's like a piece that, took your breath away, or caused you to pull the car over, or changed your life in some way.
That's a great question. I've got a weird one for you. That I came through a fluke and an ignorance of my high school self, who, I went to, I've mentioned marching band was pretty influential, primarily because I learned I became exposed to repertoire just in a kind of a germinal form, of course, in a abbreviated form on a marching field. But I'd go and hear that stuff, and then I'd go buy the recordings. I'd go out to the store and pick up a recording. And growing up, I grew up in a church for which this would not apply, but I was not familiar with the term mass. I didn't know what a mass was in high school, and so it's shocking, I know, but really that just wasn't in the lexicon, I guess, at the time. But I remember very clearly hearing it had to have been Bernstein's Mass, but I didn't catch the composer's name at the time, at a marching competition. I've only later reconstructed through kind of learning the repertoire that it had to have been probably that, since it's so popular to do with marching bands. But yeah, so I heard someone did a mass, and then I went with my buddy to the record store, and when you could still physically do such a thing,
right?
And and I found a recording that said mass, and I thought, oh gosh, so here's this piece that I had heard at the competition that I thought was so cool. Ran to the car, put it in the CD player, listened to it, and it was nothing like what I had heard. Well, what I had picked up was Dvorak's Mass. Very different sound. So, but it turns out it's a very deep and profound piece, and it's nothing like the popular sense of Dvorak's orchestral works, be it his late symphonies or his Slavonic dances or any of those things. It's nothing like that. It's very profound, very rich, very deep, and I highly recommend it to folks. But it really opened my ears up, because I just had no idea even the context for it all. So,
yeah, I remember you asked a question like this recently on Facebook, right? Like you asked something about like your favorite sacred work or something.
Oh yeah. I was crowdsourcing a little bit. I was trying to get some fresh ideas for some stuff with the choir that I work with, and came up.
Well, that Dvorak,
someone might have suggested it even.
Yeah, that Dvorak I've never heard. I've never heard that mass. So
yeah,
I was check it out.
Highly recommend it.
What's a piece by a minority or female composer do you feel like we should all know? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah. Just like the other question, there's just plenty to choose from. Well, of course, I'll redirect folks to that composer I mentioned earlier, Carolyn Chen, who just did a tremendous job, and she's doing a lot of interesting projects. She's based on the West Coast, but it was great to have her in town. In fact, she's a friend. She was a friend with another Baltimore-based person, Ian Power, and the two of them had some duets that they or some improv projects that they did together as well while they were there. Anyway, so Carolyn Chen, and then as far as a specific piece, well, I'll tell you a piece that I just discovered recently by a composer I've known of for a while, but haven't programmed their music, but plan to now, and that's a composer by the name of Undina Smith Moore. She is an African-American composer who was born in 1904, died in the late 80s, and wrote a whole range of interesting music. I believe there are some New York Philharmonic recordings of some of her music, if I remember correctly, that are worth looking up. But also she wrote a lot of interesting choral music. She wrote some really great things. The piece that I ran across the other night was this piece called "Sinner, You Can't Walk My Path." Now that's the name of a spiritual that she adapted, but she has just a fantastic, very artful rendition that she created. So that'd be a quickie that I would send people to check out, is "Sinner, You Can't Walk My Path" by Undina Smith Moore. Okay, yeah, and I'm sure I think Garrett will have notes in the webpage on the Portfolio Composer website for all this stuff. And finally, where can people find you on the internet, and how can they get a hold of you? Yeah, well, for information about Symphony Number One, our website is literally our name all spelled out as 3 English words, so there's no abbreviations, symphonynumber.one. And for my personal website is jordanrsmith.com. You can find me there. All right, awesome. And lastly, is there just one final piece of advice that you can leave with the Portfolio Composer audience? Yeah. Let me think. I'll say this. I think I might have touched on this a moment ago, but I'll re-emphasize. I've heard feedback occasionally from composers, especially younger composers that I work with a lot, and sometimes they're a little hesitant about getting a website up, as if it might be kind of. It feels like you think you're further in your career than you are, or you feel like, I don't have enough compositions to fill a website, and unless I can have a catalog page with 20 titles, then what do I need with a website? But I couldn't disagree more. The second that your first composition, the ink is dried, so to speak, get the PDF up there. The second the first recording gets up there, get it up there, get something out there so that people that would like to connect with your work can connect with your work, and can do so, via email, or, if you have social media, other contacts, get that up there. really even just a front page that has one YouTube video, a brief bio, and a score is a great start. That's at least something. And a photo. Do put a photo up, even if you don't feel like you're a photogenic person. Just get a basic photo. Smartphones are so great these days. So if you can't afford a fancy headshot, just make sure it's well lit. With a very basic background, and just put on a nice shirt.
Sure.
If you can just do that much, just get a photo up there. Just so people have a sense of the person. So people kind of like to connect with the human behind the music too.
Absolutely.
So just put that photo up there. It gives people a sense. It's not, it's not really knowing the person, but it gives you a sense of the person a little bit. So if you can just get those basic elements on a page, that will really, I've gotten as far as even recording a piece of music. I won't name names, but our latest album, which by the way is available on all the Amazon, iTunes, and Spotify, and all that. It's called Approaching. The website you can find it symphonynumber.one/approaching. But anyway, that's an example of a case where I had a composer who didn't really have a website, and we got as far as getting the album out, and they still didn't have a website, which in the end, the music was great. So we're going to make the choice based off of what the best music is. People are discovering our album. They're discovering the name of some of the composers. And this has happened before, so it's not just one person. But then they're not able to go any further than that. So that's commissions that might be going out the door. So I would just really encourage composers to think about making sure that people can find you and get a hold of you as easily as possible.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And thank you again so much, Jordan, for coming on. And I'm glad I got the opportunity to do this. So thanks to Garrett for giving us this opportunity. And it was fascinating to talk to you. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Anthony. And thanks, Garrett, as well. This is just a tremendous resource, and I'm glad this is out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you guys out there would like to learn more about me or who I am, I host a podcast called One Track, where I mostly invite composers on, and we talk about, kind of what one track they would play for people if someone was interested in getting to know their music. It's kind of like a desert island thing, but we get into some really interesting conversation about their music and their thought processes behind creating and all that stuff. And that website is One Track. It's just like the number one. So onetrackpodcast.com. And that's it. So thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Jordan. And thank you all out there for listening to the podcast. And I think Garrett will see you next week for a new episode. Later.